Okay, hi everyone. We are so grateful to have you part of this Zoom conversation with the executive producer, Cynthia Kane, of The Ants and the Grasshopper, the film you saw in connection with the UN Commission on the Status of Women. So thrilled to have you here to join us for this dialogue, and we'll get started. So, first, I'll introduce myself. My name is Paula Kweskin. I'm a filmmaker and human rights lawyer and the founder and director of the 49%, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing global women's rights through media and film. And we are so thrilled to be partnering with Mala on this incredible presentation and film. Mala is the Muslim American Leadership Alliance. It's a nonprofit civic and community organization committed to promoting individual freedom and diversity and to celebrating Muslim American heritage. So it's a great joy to be with all of you today. With me here, in addition to Cynthia Kane, the executive producer, is Zainab Khan. She is the chair and executive director of Mala, and she'll be speaking with us all and joining in this conversation. And I'm really thrilled, Zainab, that you've included us in this program.
It's so wonderful, Paula, to collaborate with you in the 49%. And Cynthia, it's such an honor to have you on this
Thank you.
on this segment today. The film is very, very profound, and I can say from Mala's on, this is our 7th consecutive year in being a part of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. My personal background, I am a licensed clinical therapist, an artist, and I am, women's rights and women's issues are always at the forefront and are very near and dear to my heart. But one of the things that I really loved about this year's CSW theme on climate change is that this is a topic that most people don't really talk about. And it affects women across the world, particularly in regions where agriculture is on the forefront and women being the bread makers and the holders of their family and their community. So this film really nailed all of these different subtopics that I think we overall tend to just kind of not really notice or we're ignorant about it. So thank you, Cynthia, for bringing light to this. And I one of the things that really stood out to me was Anita's character, who she is, how she is, what she's doing, and what her future is going to be like. So how did that even start? How did you meet Anita? What was the story behind that?
So this started really about 2009. A friend of mine who was a writer was in she worked within a writing compound where a lot of writers had desks in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And her husband worked with me. I worked at ITVS at the time, which is the funding arm of public television. And I was doing international co-productions. And one day he came in and he said, his wife wanted to know if I would meet with this writer, Raj Patel, and he has an idea for a documentary. And I had worked at Sundance and Sundance Channel and lots of different places. And so I said, sure, I'm always happy to talk to, people who have project ideas. And so we met for coffee, and that's when I first met Raj, and Raj knew Anita through Anita and Esther through the work he was doing, also through different organizations that work within Malawi. And original idea for making this documentary was taking stories from around the world. This story in Malawi, which was always sort of the front and center of everything. We also had ideas about stories in Peru and in Detroit and Detroit, Michigan in the US, and other places around the world. We were exploring many topics to kind of do a sort of an interwoven documentary about different stories. And it was hard to get off the ground, as any independent filmmaking is really difficult, raising money and stuff. But we were able to bring on some great producers, Julie Goldman, who's here in New York, and Rachel Wexler, Bungalow Town Films in the UK, Cartemquin, and Steve James in Chicago. And so the project started evolving from there. And through the years that we were raising money and developing this and doing some shooting, Raj first went with Steve James to Malawi and met Anita and Esther and actually did some initial filming. Gosh, I think that was in maybe 2012 when we first did that trip. I think it was something like that. And the story was so rich. And as we were continuing to develop, we did, lots of brainstorming sessions. We brought in some experts from all over the world, food, justice experts, climate change experts, climate crisis experts, et cetera. And slowly the project developed over the years and evolved into that we really had to focus on one story, and that was Anita's story out of Malawi. So it was a long time in the making, about 10 years from beginning to end, as many independent films are, but it was great. And finally we had there was an opportunity to bring Anita and Esther to the US, and they wanted to meet with farmers and other, like people across the United States to actually talk to them, because, the world is so connected. And yet I think so many of us, we just don't think about that. And they wanted to question, what were the practices? What were farmers here thinking? What were the differences? What were the things that we all had in common? And that happened in the summer of 2017. So it was a kind of a cross-country journey with Anita and Esther and Raj, and then Zach Piper, who works closely with Steve James a lot, part of the Cartemquin team. They decided that the perfect team to actually direct this one would be Raj and Zach. So they along with Anita and Esther, trekked across the country with Peter Mazunda from the South Africa. He was someone that a good friend of mine had worked with on another film, and he came highly recommended. He came with Anita and Esther and was a DP, one of the DPs. So that's kind of how it began. And I'll stop there.
I have so many follow-up questions, which is kind of going off script, but I'll just have to ask a couple, which is kind of a basic question of a little bit more about the characters and Peter as he's interpreting. What language is being spoken?
So one of the main languages, official. They call the official language of Malawi English because it's kind of the unifying languages, because there's so many different languages and dialects. But Chichewa is the official spoken language of Malawi, and that's what Esther and Anita basically speak in Wawaba, where Anita is from, and that's northern Malawi. And Peter could also speak it, so he was able to interpret. But Esther also she speaks perfect English. So Anita less so, but it was great. And it was I have to say, it was also an incredible, first of all, I loved meeting them. I loved doing some of the traveling with them. We instantly bonded, I think, just as women and human beings. And it's whether Anita and I could speak perfectly together or not, we really bonded as people, and there was just an instant bonding. I have to say, it was amazing. Even if we didn't speak the same language, it didn't matter.
I was really struck by the way that Anita and Esther really held their own, even though they were going across the world. Their lives could not be more different than the lives of the individuals that they met in the United States.
It's really,
I mean, just shockingly so, when they go to a farm that has hundreds of thousands of acres being farmed, and Anita farms 1 acre. And I'm just so curious, since you got to know Anita and Esther, where did that self-confidence come from, and that poise, and just their ability to dive right in? I found myself so profoundly inspired by that.
yeah, that's a great question. I think, I think certain people are just born that way. And Anita certainly she's incredibly self-confident, poised. She's an extraordinary human being. She also is incredibly strong. She really carries the weight, as I understand, in her family. And many women in her, that she, her community also do that. And it's, and Esther too, equally so. They're really strong women. Neither one has traveled a lot. Esther more so. I think she did some kind of postgraduate education, maybe in Scotland, if I remember correctly. But Anita had never traveled out of Malawi before this. And she was as comfortable here as anywhere. I know I was just amazed. It was, I think it just, sometimes there's things inherent. I think she's just a natural born leader in her community. It's just, some people are born that way. Definitely Anita is. She's got it.
I'll like to follow up and ask a little bit more about the idea of gender and gender-based violence and some of the things that were uncovered throughout the film. And I think one of the things that I admired from the filmmakers from a storytelling perspective is the shock that we as the audience felt when we found out that Anita had been abducted into marriage, that she was forced into marriage. It was just really a terrifying moment and shifted the whole, for me, the way that I view the characters. And I think one of the things that I've grappled with, and Zainab spoke so beautifully at the beginning, speaking about how important climate change is with the intersection of gender. I am finding it hard for myself to get to the climate change part because I'm stuck on the gender part, the fact that how are these women supposed to tackle something as enormous as climate change when they have all the odds stacked against them, literally being forced into marriage in some cases, that's the setting of their lives. So I just love to hear you speak about that and your experience with getting to know these women.
Well, I wish Raj was here because he speaks about this so beautifully. And I think I won't articulate as well as he would, but I think if you think about this world and if we think about the climate crisis itself, we're all very connected in this world. But I do think issues like gender equality also play into this. And it's, as I said, I think it's hard to explain. I'll try to talk about how I envision this, but if we're born thinking we're less than, and we're bearing the brunt of so much of taking care of the family, of the husband, and yet you're the one really doing all the work. Everything depends on you. And I think in this case with Anita, until she turned the tables and really stood up for herself. And I think it's gender equality in terms of where we're seeing the world right now. And I hope I don't sound too political, but I do think that it's vital and important that, this is talked about. There's certain traditions. You mentioned Anita being abducted into marriage. There's certain traditions that people say, oh, we shouldn't, talk about that. That's tradition and things. But, what is tradition and what is actually not, or something that we are forced to accept in society? That's a big question. And, I don't want to judge anyone, but, Anita really finally stood up for herself, and, and she is so smart, and she really knew the better ways of farming, the ways to protect the land, to actually heal the land that she was farming on. And I think, and her husband finally stopped one day and listened to her. And she also, and, it's a kind of a miracle of a moment where you see that this person I have not been giving the proper amount of respect or et cetera to. They have much more an equal relationship now than before. And she also talked and rallied the women in her community. You know, we're doing all the work. They were the farmers. They were, you know, and they really understood the earth in a very, very kind of different way than, you know, maybe their husbands or other, you know, men in the community. But they found a way not to necessarily to shame or to discard, you know, the other side, but to let's make this equal. Let's find the ways where you can share in the cooking, you can share in the child rearing. I think this is, I think it's so wise and so smart and so common sense. And I think that's also, I don't want to be too simplistic about this, but her ideas about tilling the land and actually even just crop rotation, very simple, but her ideas of farming are very common sense and back to, you know, some of the older and wiser ways. And anyway, I'll stop there, but I think that's, you know, she finally stood up, turned the tables herself, and also rallied her community. And, you know, I don't, you know, no place is perfect, you know, there's always things, but I think, you know, once we as human beings share in, you know, our responsibilities to each other and to the earth, I think it's, you know, mightily important and lessons we can all learn.
Thank
I
you.
think one of the things, no, that was so poignantly stated. Watching this film and seeing this and seeing like what Paula had mentioned is that there's all these obstacles in these women's lives, you know, just going like before even looking at climate change, we're looking at forced marriages, abductions, we're looking at violence, we're looking at FGM in these communities across the world, we're looking at you know, financial abuse, we're looking at all sorts of these obstacles. So really, I guess, you know, and Cynthia, you kind of have seen this issue in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
What really, like, what can we do, I guess, as a community to actually initiate change or support some of the initiatives that these women are taking? Because like Paula said, it's very hard to digest the aspect of climate change when we're looking at so many other factors when it comes to their autonomy and their safety and their well-being. How can we address the issue of climate change when we have this going on? And how can our community, like as women that are passionate about making a change, what can we do to make a difference?
Wow, that's a huge question, and incredibly important, incredibly important. You know, I think you take one step at a time. I think, and I do think it's all interconnected in certain ways. And I think, you know, people talk all the time, climate scientists down to, you know, farmers and, you know, others, activists, that we must make, you know, profound change. And, but I think, you know, that's really hard to digest. It's really hard for people to think about, oh my God, I've got to give up this, and that. You know, one thing I think is so invaluable, you know, and I don't want to tout filmmaking as, you know, as one of the solutions, but I think diving into people's stories, seeing, you know, really understanding how the world lives from, you know, whether we see it in a film, whether we travel and meet people personally, the more that we understand each other around the world. And I mean, I feel very blessed that because of filmmaking, I've been able to travel, you know, across everywhere but Antarctica, I guess. But people are we're very different, but yet we're not different at all. And I think we must come together. We must understand people's stories. We must have compassion and empathy, but also for not only for each other, but for every sentient being on the earth, and also for the earth itself, because we're not going to survive without it. And I think understanding those stories and being open to saying, what are they doing right? Maybe I can adopt that. What are we doing wrong? let's make a change. Let's actually do it. And I think that's where you start. I think it's where you start, because it's otherwise it's so overwhelming, and then we don't do anything. I have to say, meeting Anita and Esther profoundly changed my life. I was at, as I said, I was at ITBS when I met Raj in the Bay Area. I lived in Oakland. I then moved to another job. Often, as you know, Paula, when you're in independent filmmaking, you have a day job and then you keep working your passion. You're making your passion project as you're, working. So I went to Al Jazeera America and moved across the country to DC. That was a profound experience for me as well. Just working with people from 72 countries around the world, speaking multiple languages. It was an extraordinary experience that I wish the channel had survived. It lasted for 3 years. But at the time, we were still working and developing on what this film was originally called Generation Food, because of this new generation that, the younger generation is going to take us, hopefully in a better direction. And so I don't mean to lose track or anything, but but actually finally meeting them, Esther and Anita, when they came to the US in 2017, being able to travel with them, just talking to them just profoundly changed my life. And after I moved away from DC after Al Jazeera America closed and came back to upstate New York, where my partner was from, we bought an acre of land, and we've been doing like we have 1 acre of land like Anita. We've been doing a very miniature farm, but completely organically, working, in ways that, the old fashioned ways, and planting crops that are indigenous to the land, and et cetera, and rotating. But the lessons that and things that I spoke to directly with Anita and Esther, and I think of them every day, and the abundance of to eat the food that you've raised yourself, that you've grown yourself. And there's something so extraordinary. And it's awoken something in me and made me so much aware of what we can do, each one of us as human beings, to give back to the earth. Each one of us doing something will actually add up to address this climate crisis. And the more we learn about it, the more we make simple changes every single day, it really does add up. But it takes every single one of us thinking about it and doing something and making changes, and things that you might think are big sacrifices, but after you make the change, it's not such a big deal. So anyway, that answers.
That's so beautifully stated. And I just, I kind of want to wrap up the conversation here. I know it's a very short conversation with us, but just to have your perspective and just to learn about these tidbits of like behind the scenes of the films, that's just so invaluable, Cynthia. Just really, really, really want to say this. I could see the passion in this project. I could see all of the beauty and the storytelling and the reality of these women's lives, and how you captured it is just incredible. So thank you for sharing this beautiful film with us, because
absolutely,
I've learned so much just watching this, and I know people that are watching it and attending this webinar are really going to have some really key, strong takeaway points. Paula, I really want to thank you for this opportunity for us to work together. The 49% is an incredible initiative, which really focuses on film, media, and issues that are affecting women at the forefront across the world, and women that are the solution makers to these problems. So Paula, congratulations. And, I am so excited to collaborate with the 49% on behalf of Mala. With Mala, I want to thank everybody, our team, our partners, to be a part of the UN CSW and be accredited by ECOSOC has been just an incredible journey for us through Mala, because but we've seen the impact of storytelling in different ways, how it affects social change, how it affects public policy. And so this has really been an incredible journey for us as well. And I kind of want to thank everybody for tuning in, for joining us, and a lot more programs like this are to come this year. So, thank you again for being here in conversation with us.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do. Really, it's such an honor to be with you both today, and thank you for supporting this film.